Welcome to the deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I want to talk directly to you for a second, the listener, because if you're anything like the people who normally tune into these discussions, you are probably someone who is insanely curious,
Oh, absolutely.
right? You're constantly prepping for high-stakes meetings, you're exploring cross-disciplinary fields, and you're perpetually trying to reverse engineer how complex systems work.
Which is a great trait to have, by the way.
It is. But because you have that specific intellectual drive, you are almost certainly battling a massive, chronic case of information overload.
Yeah, that's the dark side of curiosity.
Exactly. I mean, you probably have an archipelago of browser tabs open right now. You've got an RSS feed that looks like a phone book.
Or a YouTube watch later playlist that you'll literally never finish.
Yes. And it creates this lingering low-level anxiety that you just cannot keep pace with the sheer volume of data required to stay relevant. Well, today, we're going to deconstruct that anxiety. We're going to completely rebuild your approach to knowledge.
And the sources we have for this are just incredible.
They really are. The mission of this deep dive is to explore a fascinating stack of sources ranging from AI-synthesized behavioral best practices to these really dense strategic cognitive briefings.
Right, and they all focus on this revolutionary operational concept called just-in-time learning, or JIT.
JIT. And we're going to see how the traditional methodology we've all internalized for acquiring knowledge is actually the exact mechanism making us less productive and, frankly, more overwhelmed.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we're looking at a total reversal of how we interact with information on a fundamental level.
We really are.
Yeah.
And to truly appreciate the magnitude of what the sources are proposing, we have to strip away the notion that this is, just a mere productivity hack.
Right, it's not just a time management trick. Exactly. It's not the Pomodoro technique. What we're examining is a fundamental paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It's moving away from a supply-driven cognitive model toward a highly precise, demand-driven model of knowledge acquisition.
A demand-driven model. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because if we look at the traditional professional landscape, our entire educational and corporate training infrastructure, it's been entirely characterized by an information stockpiling approach.
Which is what the sources refer to as just-in-case learning.
Right. The mandate was always to gather as much theoretical information as humanly possible, store it in your biological hard drive, and just hold on to it.
With the assumption that eventually, someday, you might need it.
Exactly. In some hypothetical future scenario, you deploy it. But JIT learning completely inverts that architecture. It is the strategic, almost surgical practice of acquiring specific skills or hyper-targeted information at the exact precise moment of physical necessity.
And not a millisecond before.
Not a millisecond before.
That just-in-case descriptor is so perfect. It's the default setting for anyone who grew up in the standard educational system. I mean, you're handed a comprehensive syllabus, right?
Yeah, you read the entire 400-page textbook on macroeconomic theory before you ever attempt to model a basic financial projection.
Or you sit through a 6-week certification course on digital marketing before you even draft your first ad copy.
Which is wild when you actually think about it.
It is. You accumulate these massive front-loaded knowledge sets for a purely theoretical future. But the briefing makes a really compelling argument here. It says that while that stockpiling method might have been functionally sound in stable, slower-moving industrial eras where the half-life of a learned skill was, measured in decades, it has become a severe liability today.
Oh, without a doubt. We are operating in an environment where technological frameworks shift by the quarter.
Right. Front-loading information creates a static intellectual model in a profoundly volatile ecosystem. JIT learning, by contrast, operates like a surgical strike.
You don't read the textbook. You acquire the specific syntax required right when the compiler throws an error.
Exactly. And the sources provide this rigorous analysis of the psychological traps inherent in that old stockpiling model. They introduce this behavioral persona that I think is going to hit a little too close to home for a lot of people.
Oh, the professional student.
The professional student.
Yeah, this persona is the primary victim of what the briefing calls the tutorial trap.
Or tutorial hell, as developers usually call it.
Right. And these are highly intelligent, highly capable individuals. They consume endless modules, comprehensive guides, multi-hour master classes.
It's got pristine notes.
Pristine notes. Phenomenal theoretical comprehension. But the text forces us to ask a rather uncomfortable question.
Why do we do it?
Yes. Why do we default to this behavior? Why spend 50 hours studying a framework instead of spending 5 hours actually building with it?
And the answer is rooted deep in our psychology, isn't it?
It is. We engage in this relentless consumption to simulate the sensation of progress while entirely avoiding the psychological friction and the ego threat of actual execution.
That is so true. I guarantee you listening right now have experienced this. You sit down with the intention of launching a new project, and suddenly you are 12 tabs deep into a documentation rabbit hole.
Oh, easily.
You're reading architectural debates on Reddit, you're watching these highly produced YouTube essays comparing different software stacks, you're meticulously highlighting articles.
And your brain is just flooding you with dopamine.
Exactly. Because you feel incredibly productive. You think, I am doing the work. I am learning so much today. But then you look at the clock, it's 5 p.m., and you haven't actually built a single thing.
And not one thing.
You haven't written one line of executable code. You haven't drafted the client proposal. You haven't even tightened a bolt on the physical prototype.
Yeah.
It is essentially reactive Googling masquerading as deep work.
It's a brilliantly comforting illusion, and we really have to acknowledge that there is a systemic infrastructural reason why it's so remarkably easy to fall into that trap.
It's the environment we're in.
Exactly. The algorithmic environments we inhabit, whether it's YouTube, professional networking feeds, or even just basic search engine results, they are explicitly engineered for prolonged consumption, not for discrete execution.
Their entire economic model relies on retention.
Right. They are designed to serve you the next tangential video, the next mildly related article, keeping you perpetually suspended in the learning phase. What's fascinating here is the biological consequence of succumbing to that environment.
Yes. This part of the briefing blew my mind.
The sources introduce a neurobiological concept known as biological pruning, and it completely invalidates the premise of the just-in-case stockpiling method.
I am so glad you brought that up because that specific section of the briefing completely reframed how I view casual reading. Break down the mechanics of biological pruning for us. How does the brain actually process this unapplied data?
Well, we have to view the human brain through the lens of metabolic efficiency. The brain is an incredibly energy-intensive organ. It consumes a disproportionate amount of our daily caloric intake just to maintain baseline operations.
Right, it takes physical energy to think.
A lot of it. Maintaining neural pathways and synaptic connections requires a constant expenditure of ATP cellular energy. So, when you consume data, when you sit on the couch and watch those comprehensive tutorials or read those 12 open tabs, without pairing that consumption with a corresponding physical output or a high-stakes application, your brain evaluates that incoming data stream.
And what does it decide?
It flags it as low priority. Because you are not actively utilizing the information to navigate your physical or professional environment, the brain's metabolic accounting system basically assumes the data is useless.
Wow.
And this triggers biological pruning primarily during your sleep cycles. It's essentially a ruthless cognitive garbage collection process.
Garbage collection, that's brutal.
It is. The brain actively weakens and discards those unused synaptic connections simply to conserve metabolic energy.
So the old adage of use it or lose it isn't just a metaphor. It is a literal neurochemical mechanism.
Literally.
Which means the traditional just-in-case learning model, where you read a book on management theory but don't actually manage anyone for 3 years, is a spectacularly inefficient use of time. It practically guarantees your brain will actively delete the information.
Precisely. The traditional model leads directly to information overload followed by massive memory decay. You're filling a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom.
Right.
JIT learning, conversely, forces an incredibly high rate of retention because the knowledge acquisition is heavily contextualized by immediate physical action.
You encounter a real-world problem, you hunt for the specific solution, and you apply it within minutes.
Exactly. And that immediate application signals to the brain that this neural pathway is vital for survival or success. The brain then invests the metabolic energy to cement that pathway through processes like long-term potentiation.
Okay, but hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Sure.
If I strictly adopt this JIT model, and I only ever learn the hyper-specific thing I need to unblock my project today, don't I risk developing massive intellectual blind spots? I mean, doesn't the just-in-case stockpiling method at least give us a map of the unknown unknowns? How do I even know what tools exist to unblock me if I haven't done some broad, casual, exploratory reading first?
That's a highly sophisticated critique, and honestly, it's a very common point of resistance when professionals first encounter the JIT philosophy.
It seems like a glaring hole, right?
It does, but the answer lies in differentiating between environmental scanning and deep learning.
Environmental scanning.
Right. The JIT framework doesn't forbid you from reading industry news or being aware of new frameworks. You should absolutely know that a tool like Kubernetes exists, for example, or that a new marketing paradigm is gaining traction.
Hmm.
But environmental scanning requires minimal cognitive investment. It's just maintaining situational awareness. The trap occurs when you attempt to deeply learn the intricate mechanics of Kubernetes without having a containerized application that actually requires deployment.
I do.
You maintain the map of the territory through light scanning, but you only drill down into the topography when your boots are actually on that specific ground.
That distinction makes perfect sense. Situational awareness versus deep implementation. And I think that transitions us perfectly into the core engine that actually drives this JIT methodology, which the sources identify as the anchor project.
The anchor project. Yeah.
Because if we want to stop our brains from pruning everything we learn, we have to tie the learning to something physical. The anchor project is presented as the ultimate antidote to those vague aspirational learning goals we constantly set for ourselves at the beginning of the year.
We all do it.
We do.
Yeah.
You know the ones. I'm going to learn Python, or I'm going to finally understand machine learning, or I'm going to learn woodworking.
And the sources are aggressively clear on this point. Those goals are structurally designed to fail.
Structurally designed to fail.
Yeah.
Because they're just too nebulous.
Exactly. They lack the hard boundaries necessary to filter out irrelevant information. Instead, you need a highly tangible anchor project. The contrast is really stark when you examine the mechanics of goal setting.
Walk us through that contrast.
Well, if your objective is simply to learn Python, you have essentially handed yourself an infinite curriculum. You will invariably start at chapter 1 of a textbook, learning about variables, then loops, then data structures, much of which you may not need for months.
Right, it's overwhelming.
But the anchor project forces a constraint. The goal shifts from the abstract to the concrete. As the text illustrates, instead of learning Python, the objective becomes, I will build a personal budget tracker in Python that connects to my bank's API.
That's a huge shift.
Or instead of learning woodworking, the mandate is, I will construct a mid-century modern coffee table using walnut. This seemingly subtle shift in phrasing completely radically alters the trajectory of your knowledge acquisition.
Because the physical reality of the project itself becomes the curriculum.
Exactly.
You are no longer following a predetermined syllabus created by some academic. You look at the walnut lumber you bought for the coffee table, you look at the design, and you realize, okay, I need to know how to execute a mortise and tenon joint to attach these specific legs to this specific top.
Right. You don't need to learn how to turn bowls on a lathe today.
You don't need to learn how to carve ornate headboards. The project filters the noise.
And that filtering mechanism is the essence of what the sources call reverse learning.
Reverse learning.
Yeah, the traditional academic model operates on forward learning. You sit down and ask, what am I scheduled to learn today based on the curriculum?
Like reading chapter 4, because it comes after chapter 3.
Exactly. Reverse learning, however, demands execution-first thinking. You look at your anchor project and ask, what physical state change do I want to achieve by Friday?
What outcome do I want?
Right. You work backward from the required outcome. If the outcome is a functioning authentication portal for your software application, you reverse learn exactly the cryptographic protocols or database queries required to make that portal function.
And nothing else.
Zero cognitive bandwidth is expended on data that might be intellectually stimulating, but is completely irrelevant to moving the project forward in the present moment.
That execution-first thinking requires a massive behavioral shift. And the sources outline a very strict operational boundary for when you are actually permitted to initiate a learning session. They call it the trigger rule.
The trigger rule is crucial.
It says a learning session must be explicitly triggered by a real, tangible execution bottleneck. It cannot be triggered by idle curiosity or just a sudden burst of motivation.
Which is how most of us operate.
Totally. The briefing explicitly warns against the stockpiling mindset, creeping back in with thoughts like, oh, this algorithm is fascinating. I should study it because I might need it someday.
That's the trap.
Under the JIT framework, the only valid authorized trigger for deep learning is, I currently possess a skill deficit that is actively preventing me from completing this specific task today.
Adhering to the trigger rule requires a level of cognitive discipline that, frankly, most professionals find deeply uncomfortable at first.
Oh, I bet.
It forces you to actively interrupt your own intellectual wandering. When you find yourself drifting down a Wikipedia rabbit hole about a fascinating new technology, you have to ruthlessly audit your behavior and ask, is acquiring this information solving a localized problem I have right now? Or am I simply self-soothing with intellectual entertainment?
Self-soothing with intellectual entertainment. That is a gut punch.
It forces a reprioritization of utility over mere volume. You begin to value information solely by its immediate kinetic potential.
Which perfectly sets up the tactical side of this approach. How do we actually hunt for that high-utility information without getting derailed? Here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources introduce a concept that is the absolute linchpin of JIT execution: minimum viable knowledge, or MVK.
MVK, yes.
I just love the framing of this. MVK is defined as the absolute smallest, most compressed unit of information required to take the next physical step in your project. It is the exact antithesis of comprehensive mastery.
You're actively abandoning the desire to become an expert.
Right. Your sole objective is to acquire just enough leverage to get unstuck.
The underlying architecture of the MVK concept is a ruthless application of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule.
Okay, how does that apply here?
The text argues that in almost any technical or professional endeavor, 20% of the available information yields 80% of the immediate operational results. So if you are stalled on step 3 of a 10-step process, you do not need, and you should actively avoid, a comprehensive masterclass that covers steps 1 through 10.
But you just need step 4.
You only require the specific syntax, the exact API endpoint, or the single procedural maneuver required to advance to step 4. Clarity and brevity completely eclipse comprehensiveness in this model.
Attempting to fully map the entire theoretical framework of a tool before utilizing it leads inevitably to analysis paralysis.
Exactly. Identifying and extracting the MVK generates immediate physical momentum.
But let me challenge that for a second. As a professional, isn't there a risk of building a house of cards here?
How do you mean?
Well, if I'm constantly just grabbing the bare minimum knowledge to scrape by to the next step, aren't I just hacking things together? I mean, I might get the software to run or the budget tracker to compile, but the code could be an absolute disaster under the hood because I didn't take the time to deeply understand the architecture.
That is a very valid concern, but it misunderstanding the life cycle of an anchor project.
Okay, correct me.
The goal of the initial JIT phase is purely to establish a functional baseline. You are optimizing for momentum, not elegance. The text refers to this as defeating the blank page syndrome.
Getting something, anything, on the paper.
Right. A horribly coded budget tracker that actually pulls data from your bank is infinitely more valuable than a perfectly architected software model that exists solely in your imagination.
That's a great point.
Once the project is unblocked and functional, you can iterate. You can refactor the code. You can refine the process. But you cannot refine a prototype that does not exist because you are too busy studying the theory of perfection.
Optimize for momentum, not elegance. That is a great mandate. And to protect that momentum, the sources give us some incredibly strict tactical boundaries to follow during the hunt for MVK, starting with the stop rule.
The stop rule.
It sounds simple, but I guarantee it is incredibly difficult for highly curious people to follow in practice. You must terminate your research, stop reading, and close the video the exact second you have extracted your MVK.
The exact second.
You do not finish the YouTube video just because there are 7 minutes left. You do not finish the chapter because you are near the end. You have your minimum viable knowledge, so you immediately cease consumption and pivot to execution.
It's a vital cognitive safeguard against the sunk cost fallacy of content consumption. And to enforce this, the briefing recommends the implementation of strict time boxing.
Time boxing your search.
Yes. The suggested parameter is a hard, non-negotiable 15 to 20-minute limit for any single search inquiry.
Wow, that is tight.
It is. If you encounter an error code or you need to learn how to format a specific financial spreadsheet, you initiate a 15-minute timer. If you have not located your MVK within that time box, you are required to pivot your strategy.
You can't just keep Googling for another hour.
No.
Yeah.
You must alter your search taxonomy, shift to a different platform, or ideally, completely abandon the solitary search and escalate the query to a knowledgeable colleague, a mentor, or a specialized forum.
That makes sense.
This time box prevents the cognitive fatigue and timeline decay that results from endlessly scrolling through unhelpful documentation. It forces you to treat the search process as a bounded tactical mission rather than an open-ended exploration.
And because that time box is so tight, just 15 minutes, it massively amplifies the importance of where you are looking for that information. The sources dedicate significant bandwidth to curating your search strategy. When you only have 15 minutes, the density and signal-to-noise ratio of your sources matter immensely. We really have to fundamentally change our relationship with search engines here.
Absolutely. The text issues a strong warning against relying on broad, unfiltered, general web searches when executing a JIT loop.
Like just typing your problem into Google and hoping for the best.
Exactly. General search results are heavily optimized for consumer engagement and search engine optimization, which often results in bloated, low-density content.
SEO filler.
Right. Instead, the professional must cultivate a reliance on high-signal repositories. This means prioritizing official technical documentation, utilizing targeted queries in specialized communities like Stack Overflow or GitHub,
Or going straight to an expert.
consulting trusted subject matter experts directly, or leveraging highly specific prompts with AI models designed to synthesize complex information without the filler.
I see.
The objective is to construct a personalized resource map, a curated list of go-to data wellsprings for your specific domain, so that when the 15-minute timer starts, you are not starting your search from absolute zero.
And there is this phenomenal heuristic the sources provide for filtering through the noise once you were actually in those documents. Skip the history.
Let's skip the history.
I have to confess, I'm horribly guilty of this trap. You need to understand how a specific piece of middleware functions. So you start reading a blog post, and suddenly the author is taking you through the 20-year evolutionary history of software infrastructure.
The founder's initial vision.
Right, the philosophical debates of the early 2000s, and the sources are definitive on this. You do not need the philosophical origins of a technology to deploy it right now. You just need the operational how-to.
Because the historical and philosophical context is almost always intellectually stimulating, which is precisely what makes it so hazardous to the JIT methodology.
It's a trap.
It is a highly seductive distraction. It pulls your cognitive focus entirely off the anchor project. There is a deeply relatable illustrative example in the briefing regarding this phenomenon.
Oh, I love this example.
It maps out a scenario where an individual initiates a search for a highly tactical piece of information, say a quick 2-minute tutorial on how to correctly prune a specific type of rose bush in their garden.
Seems innocent enough.
Right, but due to the associative nature of algorithmic content delivery and the user's own undisciplined curiosity, an hour later, they are deeply engrossed in a full-length documentary on the economic mechanics of the 17th century Dutch tulip mania.
Yes, the Dutch tulip trap. It is hilarious because it captures the modern learning experience perfectly. You rationalize it by thinking, well, tulips are flowers, and this is about botany and horticulture history, so I am technically expanding my gardening knowledge.
You justify it to yourself.
But the physical reality is that your rose bush is still unpruned, the sun is going down, and you are sitting on your couch consuming entertainment disguised as education.
It's the ultimate rationalization. The text formally defines this state as cognitive fragmentation. Your highly limited attentional bandwidth is diluted across far too many tangential domains.
And the result?
The net result is that you develop a shallow, trivia-level expertise about 17th century European commerce, but your localized physical anchor project experiences zero forward momentum.
So to combat cognitive fragmentation, you must become ruthless about skipping the history, ignoring the tangents, and extracting only the structural MVK required to execute the cut.
Exactly.
Okay, let's map out the ideal scenario. We have successfully bypassed the Dutch tulips, we respected our 15-minute time box, we hit a high signal source, and we successfully extracted our MVK.
You've got the knowledge.
We have the knowledge. The next phase is where the rubber meets the road. This brings us to the tactical loop. And what the sources argue is the single most critical mandate in the entire JIT philosophy, the 24-hour rule.
The 24-hour rule is the structural linchpin that holds the entire methodology together. The JIT tactical loop consists of 3 rapid consecutive phases: learn, reflect, and apply. But the sheer speed at which you traverse this loop is the determining factor of its efficacy.
Speed is everything here.
It is. The sources present a very blunt, unvarnished truth regarding this velocity. The direct quote from the briefing is highly provocative.
What does it say?
It says, if you aren't applying the newly acquired information within 24 hours, you aren't doing just-in-time learning. You are simply watching television.
Man, that quote is a massive ego check. You are simply watching television. It just strips away all the intellectual vanity we attach to consuming educational content.
It forces a hard realization.
It forces you to realize that if I watch a masterclass on high-stakes negotiation tactics, or I read a deep-dive newsletter on advanced financial modeling, but I do not actually sit at a table and negotiate or open Excel and build a model within 24 hours, I might as well have been watching a sitcom.
Exactly. It belongs entirely in the category of entertainment.
The learning, absent immediate execution, is cognitive deadweight.
It's dead weight. And to tie it back to our earlier discussion on biological pruning, the brain will treat it as such and actively dismantle the memory of it.
The garbage collection we talked about.
Right. The immediate execution loop is not just a productivity suggestion, it is a biological imperative to make the knowledge durable. You must deploy the information while the synaptic connections are actively forming to signal to your nervous system that this data is mission critical.
That application is the signal.
Yes. This immediate application transforms the abstract theoretical concept you just consumed into tangible, practical capital that you actually own and can wield. The cycle must be aggressive. Identify the bottleneck, acquire the targeted MVK, apply it to the physical project immediately, and then briefly reflect on the outcome.
I want to zoom in on that reflect phase, because it isn't just sitting back in your chair and vaguely pondering what a good job you did.
Definitely not.
The sources recommend a highly specific, rapid-fire quality check called the compressed Feynman technique. Now, I am familiar with the standard Feynman technique, named after the physicist Richard Feynman, where you teach a concept to a child to see if you actually understand it. But how does the compressed version operate within the tight constraints of a JIT workflow?
Well, the standard Feynman technique is phenomenal, but it can be very time-consuming. In the compressed JIT adaptation, it is an incredibly rapid diagnostic step that should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes.
2 to 3 minutes, okay.
Immediately after you extract your MVK, but critically, before you attempt to implement it, you force yourself to articulate the core concept out loud, or quickly jot it down in plain conversational English.
No jargon allowed?
No jargon, no buzzwords, no relying on the complex terminology the author used. If you find yourself stumbling, hesitating, or realizing that you cannot explain the mechanism without hiding behind technical vocabulary, the diagnostic has worked.
Meaning you've failed the test.
You've identified a fundamental gap in your comprehension. You do not actually possess the MVK yet. You must circle back to the source, resolve the specific gap, and attempt the compressed explanation again.
It is a phenomenal built-in fail-safe against the illusion of competence. We so often read a complex paragraph, nod our heads, and think, yep, I got it. But the moment we try to explain it to someone else, it completely falls apart.
Happens all the time.
So once you pass your own Feynman diagnostic, you move to the immediate application phase. The sources suggest a highly tactical methodology for this, particularly for technical, procedural, or digital tasks. They call it the copy, paste, and tinker method. You don't just blindly implement the solution, you intentionally stress test it.
The tinkering phase is where the superficial knowledge is forged into deep, contextualized understanding. You locate the required code snippet, the project management template, or the procedural recipe, and you integrate it into your project immediately.
The copy and paste part.
Right, but you do not simply hit run and walk away.
Yeah.
You intentionally manipulate the parameters. You change a variable, you alter an input, you break a specific line of syntax explicitly to observe how the system reacts and fails within your specific localized context.
And why is that breaking process so important? I mean, isn't the goal just to get it working?
Getting it working is step one, but tinkering is what creates what the text refers to as a memory palace for the knowledge.
A memory palace.
Yeah. When you just copy and paste, you are relying entirely on the author's logic. When you tweak a variable and watch the application crash and then fix it, you have mapped the boundaries of the tool. You've connected the foreign data to your project's unique architecture.
You've made it yours.
Exactly. And for individuals who experience profound anxiety or imposter syndrome when attempting to implement tools they barely understand, the sources offer a brilliant psychological release valve called the Dreyfus Model Shortcut.
I found this part incredibly liberating. Let's unpack the Dreyfus shortcut, because I think a vast majority of high achievers get paralyzed right here. They feel this immense pressure to be highly innovative and elegant right out of the gate. If they're learning a new skill, they don't just want to use it, they want to master it immediately.
That pressure is paralyzing.
Yeah.
The Dreyfus model of skill acquisition is an academic framework mapping the progression from absolute novice to intuitive expert.
Right.
The shortcut deployed in the JIT framework is the radical acceptance that in this specific context, you do not need to be an expert, and you certainly are not required to be an innovator.
What are you required to be?
Your only mandate is to act as a competent beginner. And the defining characteristic of a competent beginner is that they follow the provided recipe with absolute rigid precision.
No improvising.
Before you attempt to inject your own creativity, before you attempt to optimize the workflow or write a more elegant algorithm, You execute the MVK exactly as the documentation instructs. You accept that your initial implementation will likely be unrefined, clunky, and aesthetically displeasing.
You optimize entirely for unblocking the bottleneck.
Right. You can and should return later to refactor and optimize, but the immediate crisis is simply restoring forward momentum.
Just fix the flat tire. Stop trying to redesign the entire suspension system while you were stranded on the side of the highway. Just put the spare on and get the car moving.
Exactly.
But this brings up a massive structural vulnerability that the sources address, and it is probably the biggest risk associated with this entire JIT philosophy. Because JIT learning is so incredibly rapid, so hyper-specific, and so violently focused on the immediate bottleneck, the knowledge acquired is extraordinarily fleeting.
It evaporates quickly.
It does. If I use a quick 5-minute video to figure out how to reset the pressure valve on my boiler today, and I don't touch that boiler again for 18 months, I am going to completely 100% forget how I did it. When it faults out next winter, I am starting from absolute zero. I am trapped in this perpetual learn, use, forget, relearn cycle.
You have identified the primary operational vulnerability of the JIT methodology. It is highly efficient in the micro moment, but it is highly volatile and prone to decay over the macro timeline.
Right.
If you find yourself researching the exact same error code or looking up the exact same management framework every 6 months, your JIT system has critically failed. It's an unsustainable cognitive load.
So what's the fix?
The structural solution provided in the briefing is the systematic practice of assetization, the process of building a localized JIT vault, frequently referred to in knowledge management circles as a second brain.
Right. The core premise is that you stop relying on your biological brain, which we already established is constantly pruning data to save energy, to store these fleeting, highly tactical fixes. Instead, you assetize the knowledge by offloading it into a highly searchable, durable digital vault.
Exactly.
The sources mention sophisticated relational database tools like Notion or Obsidian, but also note that even a well-organized system in Apple Notes or OneNote can work. But the critical nuance here is that building a second brain isn't just mindlessly throwing web bookmarks into a digital folder.
It absolutely is not.
There is a highly specific, rigorous anatomy to how you must capture this information for it to be useful. They introduce a concept called the FUTR note, FUTR, standing for Future User to Read.
The FUTR note is an incredibly elegant mechanism to combat timeline decay. The foundational principle of capturing a FUTR note requires operating under what the text terms the total amnesia assumption.
The total amnesia assumption.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, when you resolve a bottleneck today, your present self possesses massive, rich context. You know the history of the bug, you know the frustration, you know exactly why you chose the solution you did. The fatal mistake is writing a note to your present self.
Because your present self won't be the one reading it.
Precisely. You must construct the FUTR note under the assumption that the future version of yourself, say 18 months from now, has suffered total amnesia regarding this project. They've forgotten the context, the software version, the constraints, and the logic.
The total amnesia assumption. That is a brilliant heuristic, and I desperately need to adopt it, because I cannot overstate how many times I have opened an old project note I hastily wrote to myself, and it just says something cryptic like, use the blue wire configuration for the API endpoint, or remember to bypass the auth token here.
And you have no idea what it means.
18 months later, looking at that note, it is completely worthless. I have no idea what the blue wire is, or which auth token I was bypassing. The context is entirely gone. So if we're assuming total amnesia, what exact structural elements must be present in a perfect FUTR note?
A robust, future-proof capture requires 4 specific architectural elements. First, you must isolate and record the principle, the underlying universal rule or logic that made the solution work.
Okay, the principle.
Second, you record the model, the specific framework or syntax utilized.
The model.
Third, you must clearly articulate your specific aha moment, the exact, localized insight that bridged the gap between your confusion and the resolution.
That's a great element to include.
And the fourth element is arguably the most critical. You must archive the original source material with absolute surgical precision.
Surgical precision. What does that mean in practice?
It means you do not merely paste a link to a 2-hour YouTube lecture. You capture the exact timestamp minute and second where the MVK was delivered. You do not link to a general developer forum. You provide the permalink to the exact comment thread that unblocked you.
You make it frictionless to find again.
Exactly. Furthermore, in systems like Obsidian, you must utilize rigorous context tagging. You don't just tag it code. You tag it with the specific utility, the project phase, and the conceptual category. The contextual metadata is often far more valuable to your future self than the raw data itself.
So you are emphatically not writing a comprehensive summary of the video. You are not summarizing the article. You are extracting and recording only the highly transferable insights and the exact map of how to find the raw data again.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this process of assetization is the exact mechanism by which you transform fleeting, everyday, localized problems into compounding, durable professional capital.
It compounds over time.
It does. The sources are incredibly explicit on this point. A JIT learning session is not complete until it produces a tangible external asset. It shouldn't just be an isolated note-gathering digital dust. It should evolve into a refined standard operating procedure, a one-page troubleshooting checklist for complex workflows, or a reusable internal framework.
Yes, exactly. And it is vital to understand that this assetization process applies equally to complex interpersonal and personal domains, not merely technical or software-driven tasks. The briefing provides fascinating examples of this broader application.
It does, and they're really insightful.
Consider the domain of leadership or parenting. You might construct a mentoring toolkit in your vault, a heavily distilled single-page document containing specific conversation prompts designed to elicit empathy, or frameworks for de-escalating conflict.
You don't read a psychology book in the middle of a crisis.
Right. You briefly glance at your JIT toolkit before entering the difficult conversation. For personal philosophy and decision-making, the sources suggest maintaining what they call a life compass card.
I found the life compass concept so compelling. Walk us through how that works in practice.
So a life compass card is a heavily distilled, highly accessible note featuring core philosophical wisdom extracted from figures like Epicurus, Benjamin Franklin, or Friedrich Nietzsche.
Okay.
When you are confronted with a highly complex, emotionally charged personal or professional choice, you do not have the bandwidth to reread a dense philosophical treatise on ethics or stoicism. Instead, you consult your assetized life compass card.
You pull up the exact principle you need.
Yes. You read a concise 3-line reflection on enduring adversity or maintaining integrity, and you immediately apply that MVK to your daily decision matrix. It allows you to deploy profound historical wisdom at the exact moment of tactile friction.
It takes these grand, massive, sometimes impenetrable philosophical concepts and distills them into a highly tactical JIT tool that you can deploy in under 2 minutes. It is brilliant.
It really is.
Yeah.
But hearing all of this, the sheer efficiency, the high retention rates, the compounding nature of the JIT vault, it naturally raises a very critical, obvious question. So what does this all mean? If just-in-time learning is this incredibly powerful, Pareto-optimized, highly retained superpower, why in the world wouldn't we simply use it for absolutely everything?
Right. Why not just abandon just in case entirely?
Why do we need any other kind of learning ever again?
That is the pivotal question. Yeah. And to their credit, the sources are incredibly careful to delineate the strict limitations of the JIT framework. The analogy used in the text is perfect. JIT is described as first aid, not long-term health.
First aid, not long-term health.
Yes. It is a magnificent, unparalleled tool for acquiring procedural knowledge, mastering software tools, debugging syntax, executing physical repairs, and deploying context-specific tactics. It fails catastrophically, however, when it is applied to complex, systemic subjects that demand deep, foundational, interconnected understanding.
Give us an example of where it fails.
Well, you absolutely cannot JIT learn organizational leadership. You cannot JIT learn corporate ethics, advanced quantum physics, grand strategy, or structural architectural design. Attempting to learn those profound disciplines just in time will result in a highly fragile, dangerously superficial intellectual foundation.
That makes intuitive sense. You cannot just look up a 15-minute YouTube tutorial on utilitarian ethics while you are sitting in the boardroom in the middle of a massive moral crisis regarding a product recall.
You'd be laughed out of the room.
Right. That kind of decision requires a deeply ingrained worldview, a philosophical architecture that has been meticulously built and pressure-tested over years of study. And the text points out that relying entirely, 100% on JIT learning leads to a very specific pathology called reaction-based living.
Reaction-based living.
You become the ultimate firefighter. You are highly tactical, you are constantly busy, you are always resolving the immediate bottleneck, but you never develop any strategic depth. You are managing the microcrises, but you have no idea where the company or your life is actually heading over the next decade.
Exactly. True intellectual authority and sustained high performance require a synthesis of both models. You absolutely need the high-velocity, precision tactics of JIT to execute daily operations, but you are entirely dependent on the foundational, interconnected wisdom of just-in-case learning to know what operations are worth executing in the first place.
You need both.
You do. To achieve this balance, the sources recommend a highly specific architectural framework for your intellectual bandwidth, the 70-30 architecture. This is particularly recommended for professionals operating at the highest levels of their field or during periods of intense, focused output, which one of the strategic briefings refers to as operating in monk mode.
Yes, the professional learning portfolio. Yeah, I'm going to spend some time here because this is the blueprint for actually scheduling this in reality. Break down the mechanics of this 70-30 split for us. How does a busy professional actually implement this?
The 70-30 framework dictates the allocation of your deliberate learning time. The recommendation is to dedicate 70% of your learning bandwidth to deep strategic study. This is the rehabilitation of the traditional just-in-case learning model, but applied with intense intentionality.
So 70% on deep study.
Yes. The 70% is insulated time. This is when you step away from the immediate bottlenecks. This is where you read the dense 500-page historical biographies, where you study the foundational texts of economics, where you build your complex ethical frameworks, and where you construct a resilient 20-year intellectual architecture.
This is the foundation building.
Right. This deep study is what builds your unshakable professional identity and strategic vision. The remaining 30% of your learning bandwidth is then strictly reserved for the JIT learning loops. This 30% is highly reactive, utilized entirely for hunting MVK and unblocking the specific daily execution bottlenecks we have been dissecting.
So if I have a director of engineering, my 70% is spent deeply reading about the future of distributed systems, studying the history of technological shifts, and understanding team psychology. That is my foundation.
Exactly.
And my 30% is spending 15 minutes figuring out why a specific AWS Lambda function is failing in my current sprint.
Perfect example.
So what does this all mean? It means that JIT is a highly specialized tactical tool that exists to serve your long-term strategic architecture, not to replace it. Your 70% deep study dictates the master plan. It tells you that you need to build a house to shelter your family, and it tells you where to build it to avoid the floodplains. That is the strategy.
Right.
Your 30% JIT learning is looking up the exact precise ratio of water to Portland cement required to pour the physical foundation this afternoon.
Oh.
Both are absolutely non-negotiably necessary, but they serve completely different masters.
That is a flawless summation of the dynamic. The defining hallmark of a truly elite, high-performance individual is the cognitive flexibility to seamlessly zoom all the way in to the microscopic, hyper-focused friction of tactical JIT execution, and then, without losing their bearings, zoom all the way out to the macroscopic 10,000-foot view of their long-term just-in-case strategy.
Zooming in and out.
Yeah, the 70-30 split is the structural mechanism that ensures you are not merely reacting blindly to your immediate environment like a pinball, but actively, intentionally building a durable, compounding asset of knowledge over the arc of your career.
This has been an absolutely paradigm-shifting deep dive. The mechanics here are so actionable. Before we officially wrap up, I want to crystallize this into the ultimate JIT checklist for you, the listener, so you can literally start applying this to your workflow the minute this audio finishes.
Yeah, cheat sheet. I love it.
If you are stuck, here are the 5 definitive steps to mastering the JIT session. Number 1, stop. Arrest your current momentum. Define the exact, specific physical outcome you need to achieve in the next hour.
Number 2, filter. Hunt for the one single concept, syntax, or rule you need to bridge the gap to that outcome. Identify your minimum viable knowledge.
Number 3, capture. Utilize a curated, high-signal, reliable source. Explicitly skip the history, set your non-negotiable 15-minute timer, and do not let yourself get seduced by the Dutch tulips.
Number 4, apply. Execute the knowledge immediately. Remember the brutal reality of the 24-hour rule. If you aren't doing it today, you are just watching TV.
And number 5, archive. Assetize the fix. Save the specific solution, the exact timestamp, and the rich metadata context in your second brain for future you, operating strictly under the total amnesia assumption.
This raises an important question for you listening to us right now. I want you to audit your current professional landscape. Look at your own life, your own whiteboard, your own task manager. What is the one specific anchor project you have been endlessly, passively studying for?
Where are you currently trapped in tutorial hell?
Exactly. Identify the project that you could actually physically start and potentially finish today if you simply gave yourself permission to stop stockpiling knowledge and start demanding it through execution.
That is the ultimate challenge for today. Hunt down that bottleneck. But I want to end this deep dive with a final, slightly provocative thought that builds on everything we have just mapped out. We've spent this entire time dissecting how powerfully the 70/30 JIT framework operates for autonomous professionals, for engineers, for executives, and for adults who already possess a baseline of knowledge.
Right.
But extrapolate this out. What if our entire global educational infrastructure completely abandoned the stockpiling just-in-case model for young students?
Oh, wow.
Imagine a radically redesigned school system where children are no longer forced to passively memorize isolated facts for a hypothetical standardized test a decade in the future. Instead, imagine they are grouped together and handed complex, high-stakes, real-world anchor projects, like physically building a functioning, sustainable community garden, or engineering and coding a localized water filtration system for their town.
That would be revolutionary.
And within that system, they're only taught the advanced mathematics, the historical context of agriculture, and the biological sciences required to solve the specific friction points of those projects in that exact moment.
Only what they need, exactly when they need it.
Right. If we applied JIT to childhood education, would we forge a generation of unparalleled, highly engaged, hyper-competent problem solvers who truly understand how to manipulate their reality?
Oh,
Or, by abandoning that 70% of broad, just-in-case deep foundational study, would we inadvertently destroy the shared historical baseline of wisdom that functionally holds a cohesive society together?
that is a massive question.
It is a massive structural question, and it is something to seriously ponder as you evaluate not just your own learning systems, but the systems we build for the future. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go tackle those bottlenecks, build your bold, and we will catch you next time.